What did he say? Okay. Um, Hi, everyone. My name is Dan Popovic. It's my great pleasure to welcome back Steve here at Google. He was here a week or two ago, and many people wrote me personal emails asking if he could come back. So here he is again, talking now about reversing Alzheimer's disease. Let's have a warm welcome for Steve.
Thank you. Been looking forward to this presentation. This is a long-time personal interest of mine. Although the title of the presentation is What Can I Do for Grandma? For me, it was about my grandfather. When I was in college, my grandfather developed and died of Alzheimer's disease. And so it's been a lifelong wish that I could make a significant contribution to this disease and reversing it, and I'm pleased to say that that's now a reality. It's not a proven reality, so if you're looking for double-blind clinical studies of this, you're going to be disappointed. But if you're willing to suspend your disbelief and try something as simple as giving your family member with Alzheimer's disease something like coconut oil and B-complex vitamins and see if it works, you may be very pleased. I'll also like to preference, because of a series of comments that I received about this topic in the last several days, I'd like to, in a sense, warn people, Google employees from other countries who may not be as immersed in nutrition and alternative medicine as Americans are. In the United States, we have the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, which declares that dietary supplements, vitamins, amino acid, herbs are foods and not drugs to prevent the prospect of overregulation. And this is unique to the United States, and as a result, there's a huge cultural focus on dietary supplements and nutrition here that may not be as well developed in other countries. And so if you're from another country, you may have a certain amount of cultural shock from some of the information I'll be talking about in this presentation. Let me start off with my ground rules for this presentation. And I don't normally do this kind of thing, but because there are some potential issues regarding why I'm telling you this information, I'd like to go through this so people know where I'm coming from. First of all, this information is based on solid scientific principles. You can go to my YouTube presentation for the technical side of things, but I'll warn you, it's pretty deep. If you're not a scientist, you may not appreciate it very much. If you're looking for the actual citations to the references, those are in an article published at CERI.com, CERI.com, that was originally written in 2002. So here it is 7 years later, and this information is still not widely known or distributed. And that's why I'm here today. The medical methods that I will talk about towards the end of the presentation, they're all validated. The therapies are accepted by various specialists. And so I'm not suggesting that anybody do things that haven't been done thousands or millions of times before and scattered all over the world. It may seem like it, but this is not rocket science. This is nutrition. This is food, this is diet, dietary supplements. And so, it may be shocking to know, but Alzheimer's disease has been reversed 10 different ways so far, and I'm only going to be presenting one. But if you want to look, there are a couple of links that I provided on my YouTube channel to, for example, Enbrel injections that have reversed one case of Alzheimer's disease in 2 hours. In other words, the woman came in a wheelchair and walked out talking. For those of you who are skeptics and would like to believe this but have your doubts, I will guarantee the results. If it's important to you, talk to me. I will guarantee the results. I define the clinical rationale and the therapies, and you define what it means in terms of what result you want from your relative, and I'll be happy to accept those terms. Okay, let's start. I'm going to give you 3 slides from my earlier YouTube presentation for those people who haven't seen it yet, just so you get an idea of what the theme is of this presentation. This will only take a few minutes. The dashed line is the redox potential of the body, which is the balance between loose electrons and tight electrons. And living systems need lots of loose electrons. This is called a reduced environment. And so reduction is about gaining of loose electrons, oxidation about losing of these loose electrons, and the two of them together are called redox. And that's for redox potential. That's the hard science part of it. I'll show you one more slide to scare you, but from now on it'll be pretty simple. The star of this movie is glutathione. Glutathione is the most plentiful antioxidant in the human body, and it's got a sulfhydryl group, SH. That's why it's GSH, and the G doesn't stand for Google, it stands for glutathione. And the SH does defensive function in the body, and it, first of all, absorbs free radicals, so it intervenes in oxidative stress, and then becomes oxidized, which is the GSSG, and our cellular energy systems reverse that process to regenerate the glutathione so that it can do its job again and again, hundreds, thousands of times. Well, glutathione also has a second job, which is mercury. It binds to mercury. It detoxifies mercury for us. And so when glutathione binds to the mercury, it swings the mercury, the toxicity of the mercury, back towards the balance point so that the mercury has less effect on the body and doesn't sabotage the enzymes that have the sulfhydryl groups where it's needed for that enzyme to work. These enzyme systems in Alzheimer's disease are creatine kinase, which is the backup energy system for the body, a phosphorylation cycle, which regulates the biorhythm of the brain, which is 90 seconds, the microtubules, which are the information or the material transport system for the brain, and beta amyloid, which is the clinical marker of end-stage Alzheimer's disease. So what happens is the energy systems of the body diminish, glutathione levels decrease because it's not being recycled, mercury expands, tips the balance, and it knocks over these enzyme systems. And so creatine kinase fails, which is the backup system. Phosphorylation cycle fails, which means the dynamic rhythm of the brain regarding the tightening and relaxing of the cytoskeleton stops, ceases to oscillate. And then the microtubules fail, and the microtubules are unique to the brain because the brain has very, very long axons and dendrites. If an axon or a dendrite were the size of a 2-lane highway, these would be the length of the distance from San Diego to Maine. And so when this system falls apart, nerve cells are seriously compromised. And this is what happens after a long state where all of the dominoes have fallen over and you get cellular debris accumulating. And the microtubule protein accumulates as debris. It's known as tau tangles, and the beta amyloid is the plaque that forms in the Alzheimer's brain. It's visible at autopsy. So how do you fix it? We reverse Alzheimer's disease by normalizing the energy levels. We stop the brownout, the glutathione increases, it controls the mercury, then the creatine kinase enzymes are replaced, the phosphorylation enzymes that are dysfunctional kick in again and start the cycle again, the microtubule transport systems reassemble, and the beta amyloid is digested. For those of you that want a picture, I mean, a lot of us, words are fine, but for those of you who want a picture, this is in the YouTube video, and this diagrams all the pathways that will be talked about here. But I'm not going to go in and explain that all to you now. I'd rather have Q&A opportunities at the end of the presentation. So this is what I'm going to show. This is what I'm going to talk about during the presentation. This isn't rocket science. At the beginning of it, you've got diet, fat burning mode, vitamins, minerals, all very, very low-tech things. Towards the end of the presentation, I'll get into the higher tech stuff, which is medical. Detoxification. You need medical supervision to do proper detoxification. Mitochondrial nutrients. Well, maybe you don't need medical supervision for those, but it may be a good idea. Hormones, you definitely need medical supervision, both for the testing and for the prescription of testosterone. If you need it, you absolutely need a prescription. And for getting rid of drugs, you need a doctor. This is about recognizing the causes of disease that are being mistreated with drugs and fixing them with nutrients, and then when the drug is no longer needed, phasing the drug out. So I'm going to start with the basic issues of diet, and we have the standard American diet, which alternative medicine people love because of the acronym. It's very sad. And I'm going to suggest that the key to Alzheimer's disease is the Calvin-Ezrin diet. There's multiple books available. This has been discussed for close to 20 years. It's all about reducing carbohydrate to restore insulin sensitivity for dealing with syndrome X and risks of diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And it involves increasing fat and keeping protein moderate, which is the opposite of the Atkins diet, which has received lots and lots of attention. However, protein is a potential liability for the elderly. So the Ezrin diet is superior. Basic advice, eat nutrient-dense foods. That's not very much rocket science at all. Low-carb vegetables are a no-brainer, leafy greens. If you're going to eat fruit, and when you do eat fruit, eat colored fruit so that you get the biggest bang for your buck. Emphasize coconut oil, which has the MCT content. I'll explain that in a minute. And you have to deal with the issue of weight. If you're dealing with the elderly and they're losing weight and they're underweight, you've got to monitor their weight to make sure they don't lose weight from the coconut oil. Eat meat, especially cold water fish, and do not fear mercury. My whole presentation is about mercury toxicity, but I'm here to tell you that it's not about the mercury. It's about the mercury detoxification systems that fail. And so if you worry about the mercury and you attempt to remove it, you can end up in deep. Okay, another part of this is inflammation. I'm only going to talk about that here. Turns out inflammation is a very, very well-connected mechanism for Alzheimer's disease. So from the bottom end, if you're not trying to track down infectious diseases and viral problems, you eliminate wheat, corn, milk, yeast, and maybe eggs, which are the top 4 to 5 most common allergens. These are measured by IgG, IgM, and IgA antibodies that any doctor can order, although you may have to go to a nutritional doctor, an alternative doctor, complementary doctor, so that they're willing to actually prescribe those kinds of tests. Digestive aids, that's another low-tech way of reducing inflammation. Coconut oil is my favorite because in the 2 people that I've dealt with probable Alzheimer's disease, coconut oil alone had an immense beneficial effect. People started coming back, one case from coconut oil alone, another one with coconut oil combined with a B-complex vitamin. Why this isn't recognized by people, there's a whole bunch of reasons for this, but fundamentally, coconut oil activates energy mechanisms, so it restores the energy that browns out as we get old. It has very low polyunsaturated fat levels, which turns out to be important for the oil not being rancid. Rancid oil suppresses your immune system. It's a carcinogen, a mutagen. And so the coconut oil does not stress out your antioxidant defense system, which is already compromised in Alzheimer's disease. And it doesn't adversely affect your immunity like protein does. Fat's essential for the brain and body. I think it's a key to graceful aging, and it's the fastest way to reverse insulin resistance or syndrome X or metabolic syndrome. It's absurdly easy, trivially expensive, and it works by itself in some cases. So this is where I suggest people start. You know, who's going to object if you start to give grandma some coconut oil? Ketosis would be the next step, which is taking fat burning to the next level. Ketosis is about your liver burning large quantities of fat and exporting those fat subunits to the entire body. Turns out this is extremely valuable. It's medically underutilized because of fears of the effect of ketosis on late-stage diabetic patients and the lethality of ketoacidosis. However, in people who are healthy and people who don't have diabetes or don't have late-stage diabetes, ketosis can be incredibly therapeutically beneficial. Ketone fuels are favored by all organs, 10 to 1. Cells from any organ, when put in a combination of glucose and ketone fuels, will soak up ketone fuels with a 10-fold higher rate. In rodents, you have a 50% increase in heart ejection fraction in 30 minutes in a model of cardiac failure. And contrary to conventional wisdom, half of your brain's energy can be met by ketone fuels. But it takes about 2 weeks to make this adjustment. It's inexpensive to implement. It's all about dietary control. It's not like you have to invest in drugs and equipment. And what it does is it produces NADH, which is the key factor that drives glutathione cycling. Vitamins. Talk about inexpensive. B-complex vitamins, 1 cent a day, 5 cents a day. Lowest possible order of toxicity. Take 10 times the RDA, the toxic dose is beyond 1,000 times the RDA. 100 to 1 therapeutic index. Deficiencies are actually quite common. Here's a couple of examples in terms of water-soluble vitamins being lost through urine. B12 absorption is compromised with age, and this is what comes from meat. Folate polymorphisms affect between 5 and 55% of the population. So if you carry this gene, your ability to utilize folic acid is compromised. And at the 55% incidence in Norwegians and Swedes and Finns, this is not a rare problem. Testing is available, but it's expensive. It's often better, from bottom line, to just do it, because spending 5 cents a day as avoiding thousands of dollars of tests, or at least hundreds of dollars minimal of tests, is, in most people, a good decision, a smart economic decision. I'm going to spend a little time here talking about vitamin D because of its recent recognition of its value. It's now being connected to Alzheimer's disease and all kinds of neurodegenerative conditions, but it's better known for dealing with preventing cancer and other kinds of, like heart disease and other degenerative diseases, but it's now getting some respect as a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. So vitamin D deficiencies are widespread. Number one reason is because people are afraid of skin cancer. Well, the research shows that this myth is, or this fear is basically unfounded. There's only 2 kinds of cancer that are actually aggravated by regular, routine sun exposure. The rest of them, the risk is reduced. And in terms of therapy, the kinds of skin cancers that are at higher risk for sun exposure are the easiest to treat, and the ones that are the nastiest to treat are the ones that are actually prevented by sun exposure and vitamin D. Skin pigment interferes, so if you have darker skin, you need more vitamin D and more sun exposure to get the same bang for your buck. Atmospheric thickness matters. So during the winter, when the sun angles through the atmosphere more, you get less vitamin D rays. So the higher you are in the atmosphere, you get more vitamin D rays. So because we're at sea level, or as close to sea level as you can get without getting wet, we don't get much vitamin D here. The further north we are, the less vitamin D we get from sunlight. Air pollution also absorbs the vitamin D rays. So if you go out and nude sunbathe on a rooftop in San Francisco, you will get vitamin D in the winter and in the summer. But if you do that in Oakland, you will not get any vitamin D at all, because all the air pollution blows across the bay and stacks up against the hills and absorbs all the vitamin D rays. UVB. Right there. Toxicity myths and realities. I find this one quite interesting because there's huge amounts of literature warning people about vitamin D toxicity. So this is the myth. 400 units is safe, and 800 to 1,000 has some risk. And there's lots of 800 to 1,000 unit supplements in your health food store, but if you were in Norway or Eastern Europe, you're not going to find anything on the shelves. But in fact, 5,000 unit doses have been used by practitioners for 50 years without any problems. No vitamin D toxicity. 50,000 unit doses have been used by Dr. Prendergast, who's on the other side, or actually on this side of the bay, on this peninsula. for 50,000 units a day for 6 to 12 months at a time with, and he's an endocrinologist, no sign of vitamin D toxicity, no sign of calcification, high calcium levels in the blood. And there is a paper now that's been published about this issue where they found 2 men who had taken very high levels of vitamin D, one at close to 200,000 a day and the other one at 225,000 a day, where one of them had minor signs of vitamin D toxicity and the other one didn't. Minerals. Minerals are coenzymes in the systems of the body. All the machines that do work for us metabolically require enzymes. They're also electrolytes for the brain. Calcium-magnesium balance is an important one for Alzheimer's disease, but also for excitotoxicity. People who have Chinese restaurant syndrome, that's caused by imbalance of calcium-magnesium and the cellular energy for pumping out the calcium. Minerals for antioxidant function. These are necessary for the antioxidant defense system to defend you against free radicals. So these things support the glutathione system, which is challenged in Alzheimer's disease. Magnesium is commonly low. I've never had a neurologically compromised client who didn't have a magnesium deficiency. High blood pressure, muscle cramps, swelling in the ankles, these are common symptoms, but magnesium is not well known to be necessary for ATP function. Turns out the ATP molecule wraps itself around the magnesium to go into the enzymes to do its job, and without the magnesium, the ATP cannot power the enzyme. Also, in terms of minerals, iron toxicity is not recognized, and many doctors will prescribe iron to the elderly fairly capriciously, looking at the iron in red blood cells, the hemoglobin, and not looking at the ferritin, which is the reserves of iron. And so there oftentimes you will find people who are elderly that are on the edge of iron toxicity because they've been, in the old days, taking Geritol, and in the new days taking all kinds of supplements and medically prescribed iron. So now I'm going to start to get in a little bit of the medical side of things, detoxification. Heavy metals sabotage our energy pathways. They're incredibly destructive in terms of affecting fetal brain development and childhood brain development, but they do have debilitating effects in the elderly as well. They are a specific burden to glutathione, and they're rarely screened. I've probably dealt with a few hundred people with senility and cognitive problems, and a few of them have had systematic heavy metal assessments. So if Kaiser won't do a chelation challenge for you, and you get them to agree to a non-chelation challenge, what you can do is take DMSA on your own authority and turn their non-chelation challenge into a chelation challenge, which means the reading you get will be honest rather than artificially suppressed. EDTA chelation therapy is very effective for lead. Mercury chelation is problematic, and this is one of the reasons why I don't encourage people with neurological illnesses to have their fillings replaced or to do chelation therapy. I suggest that that be postponed until they're fully cognitively aware, and then have them make the decision if they want to do it. Mitochondrial nutrients deal directly with the energy production systems. The mitochondria of the cell, there may be thousands of them in a heart cell with a high metabolic rate, and 300 per cell in a, let's say, the base of the brain, the cerebellum. And so different cell populations have different mitochondria, and so in some people this is a compromise that you can address with nutrients, and in other people it may not be. So until you try it, you really don't know. There isn't a real easy test that doctors can do to tell you this, and so it comes down to empiricism. There is a way to measure basal metabolic rate. It's called whole body calorimetry, but you're not going to find a whole body calorimeter more than 3 places in the United States, and then they will be run by a tech and a PhD scientist to keep it in tune, and they won't let you touch it, let alone get assessed in it. So you monitor your body temperature and changes in strength, stamina, and well-being. This tells you whether these things are enhancing your energy. If you're at 70 volts and your voltage goes up to 90, your 110 volt appliance works. B1, 2, and 3, again, not rocket science. This is ordinary nutrition. These are critical to the mitochondrial function. Lipoic acid and R-lipoic acid, which is the active isomer. These are available as dietary supplements in the United States. Thousands and thousands of people take this stuff here and rarely anywhere else in the world. Carnitine and acetyl L-carnitine, the combination with lipoic acid, have an amazingly rejuvenating effect on mitochondrial function. Bruce Ames has studied this extensively and has actually filed a patent on that combination. But you can buy them in a health food store without having to buy his particular brand. But if you're anywhere else in the world, you're not going to find either that or the individual nutrients available, and they'll usually have to be ordered from the United States. Coenzyme Q10 is a wire in the electron transport chain connecting two of three batteries together. Again, this is not a common deficiency in the healthy, but this CoQ10 deficiency is induced by statin drugs, which are widespreadly used and in the elderly. NADH complex 1 is available as a dietary supplement. The precursor for it is the standard B vitamins, niacinamide and niacin. And in terms of Alzheimer's research, there's a good reason to favor niacinamide over niacin. NADH is expensive. Niacinamide is $20 a kilo. Why hormones? Well, hormones regulate energy systems. This is the top-down system for regulating energy. They decline with age, they decline with illness, they decline with energy shortfall. In other words, your body has to have energy to synthesize hormones. Thyroid hormone is a big one because this one is directly wired into your energy systems. I'll give you a little bit more information about that in a second. The warning about doctors is they don't test the T4 to T3 or reverse T3 pathway. They also don't test generalized resistance to thyroid hormone. So how do you deal with that if you've got this kind of a problem? Well, you have to know what you're asking for and insist that the doctor perform the necessary tests. Adrenal hormones work with thyroid hormones. Adrenal exhaustion produces massive fatigue, which is a common symptom in the elderly, and it also disrupts sleep. And so if you're not sleeping well at night, you're not actually very awake during the day. Sex steroid hormones are the most powerful switches. Progesterone and testosterone are the on switch, and estrogens are the off switch. So your estrogen-progesterone ratio, your estrogen-testosterone ratio, these are things that doctors don't measure, but if you get the tests, you can look at those ratios yourself. Here's the steroid tree. This is how the steroids grow. They start down here at the bottom with cholesterol converting to pregnenolone. And pregnenolone is the grandfather of all the hormones, and then they start to differentiate, branching out all over the place. And so if you look at them in categories, these are neuroprotective steroids, with the pregnenolone and progesterone being the most potent, with DHEA being very, very weak by comparison. And then you've got androgenic hormones in this sector, with testosterone and dihydrotestosterone being the most potent. In this part of the tree, these are the estrogens, these are the off switch, and estradiol and estrone are the most potent. And so this enzyme pathway here that converts an androgenic into an estrogenic, and this pathway down here, my pad is getting a little weird, converts them, and this one over here converts them. These three pathways are turned on by inflammation. So this is why inflammation is a deep trigger for this kind of condition. It's also why many men will suddenly start to lose weight at some point in their life, or to gain weight, gain body fat percentage, because estradiol turns on those pathways of building fat, and the androgenic hormones that would otherwise turn on the energy are being converted. So your energy is going down, and your fat-burning mechanisms are being stimulated. And this can happen in 1 year if there's an infection that triggers it, or an allergy that triggers it. And this is your neurotoxic part of the tree. This part down here are the mineralocorticoids that regulate minerals and the kidneys and all kinds of things. So let's get into the thyroid hormone fairly deeply, because there's some misconceptions that have serious repercussions to people. So TSH, this is a frontline test. If you go to Kaiser and get assessed with your annual physical, it's typical that you would get a TSH test. You might not, but that's what they would tend to do. And if you're lucky, they'd give you a TSH and a T4. and maybe you get a free T4, which is superior to the regular T4, but you're certainly not going to get a T3 test, a free T3 test, a reverse T3 test, or a thyroid autoantibodies test. So if you have hypothyroid symptoms and your doctor tells you your thyroid gland is fine, they do a test, they're only looking at TSH and T4, they're not looking at these other tests, and they really don't have a scientific basis for telling you that your thyroid is fine and your symptoms are all in your head and that you should learn to live with it. So on the right is a diagram. And so here's the TSH. This is your brain's thyroid thermometer. And if it gets confused, your regulatory loop loses its set point and changes, how are you going to know that? There isn't a test to tell you whether that TSH is accurate from the point of view of your metabolism. So you can't rely upon it in terms of basal metabolic rate and your energy production systems. Most of your thyroid gland produces T4, and 15% of it is T3. But T4 converts to T3 in the peripheral tissues of the body. So all of the organs of your body have individual control of the energy mechanism. They can override the brain system. Do they or do they not? Well, there isn't a test for that. And you also have peripheral conversion here of the T4 to reverse T3. This turns out to be very important because T3 is 4 times more potent than T4. So this peripheral conversion amplifies your thyroid system, your energy systems, by a factor of 4 for the proportion. And the reverse T3 has 0 activity. So it's like pouring gasoline out on the road. You don't get any bang for that buck. And so this peripheral conversion turns out to make all the difference in the world. Are you being amplified by a factor of 4, or are you being trashed to 0? If you don't get a T3, reverse T3 ratio, how are you going to know that? The TSH and T4 tests don't give you a clue about that kind of metabolic issue. So measuring reverse T3 while you measure T3 and doing a ratio gives you that specific information, and the statistical correlation with that test result with actual basal metabolic rate is twice as good as T3 alone and 3 times better than T4 alone. There's also thyroid autoantibodies that can crop up. I don't run across them very much, but they can be a factor, so I suggest they be tested. And GRTH, generalized resistance to thyroid hormone, there is no test for it. So even if you go through this entire process and get every one of these tests done, from all the way from the top to the bottom, and they're all perfectly textbook normal, you still don't know whether you have generalized resistance to thyroid hormone. And there is one way to verify that, and that's with a thyroid trial, and that can be done at home. Doctors don't like to do it because the risk of hyperthyroidism is significant. But if you show your doctor that you can collect reliable pulse rate data and body temperature data, then the prospect of hyperthyroidism is now under control, under clinical control, even though you're doing it at home. And if you develop hyperthyroidism, you will know it and you can stop your thyroid right away. But if your body temperature normalizes and your pulse rate normalizes and your mind normalizes, you have more cognitive function, you start sleeping better, your constipation goes away, your depression goes away, then you had this generalized resistance to thyroid hormone. Or one of the other issues, a T3, reverse T3 problem. And therefore, the tests that say your thyroid is normal are just not measuring the right thing, and you need to take thyroid hormone to be fully functional. Why drug use? Well, drugs interfere with body homeostasis. They sabotage different mechanisms. That's how they work. They can have profound cognitive effects, especially when they're combined. And the mistake that in the philosophy of allopathic medicine is that they are often prescribed for nutritional problems. Somebody has high blood pressure, they're given a blood pressure drug. They're not tested for nutritional deficiencies that could cause that. So blood pressure drugs instead of magnesium, okay, that's an obvious one. Calcium channel blockers, well, that's a drug that's used to treat senility syndromes, and a class of drug. And that, if that's a magnesium deficiency, again, the drug is a patch to an underlying problem that is not being clinically addressed. Antidepressants instead of B-complex. You know, why would you want to risk you know, infertility and having no libido, when you can get positive libido effects from B-complex vitamins or thyroid hormone or 5-HTP, which is a nutritional supplement for raising your serotonin levels. So these whole series of drug use that can be dealt with nutritional ways, if you go back in with somebody who's got all these drugs on board and you investigate all the nutritional problems and eliminate them, then the drugs become optional and you can phase them out without having adverse consequences. And this is very important when you're trying to to restore somebody who is a victim of polypharmy and you know, restore their cognitive function. Okay, this is I'm almost at the end. I'm going to open it up for questions in a few minutes. This is the philosophy that I've just been talking about in terms of the use of symptom-oriented drugs versus actual functional medicine. And so, you know, if we look at the body in terms of systems that I've been describing here, we have two different kinds. We have the top-down and the bottom-up systems. And at the top-down, we have our thoughts and our emotions, our spirituality, our esteem, these kinds of you know, the reality of what we are as beings. That part of things is the top-down part of our body, our brain, our mind. At the bottom, we have nutrition. These are the pieces of the machine: food or vitamins, minerals, light, fuel like coconut oil. So without these, without the right mixture of these things, our bodies can't work the way they're supposed to. And in between, we have, for example, our neuroendocrine systems. This is about the hormones. This is about our immune system. This is about proper sleep and biorhythms. So this is, instead of the mind, we're now talking about the brain and the brain-associated systems like the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. At the bottom end, below nutrition, we have metabolism. This is the dynamic part of these pieces, the process of the body. And so we have, you know, glycolysis, which is burning sugar for energy, ketosis, which is burning fat for energy, you know, issues of digestion. We can have, in terms of water and hydration, the edema that I was talking about earlier and swelling of the ankles, when that fails, the phosphorylation cycle, the energy cycle. These are all the integral of the nutrients. It's motion instead of speed or static position. In between these, what we have when they fail are symptoms. So if anything up from the top fails, you get a symptom. Anything from the bottom fails, you get a symptom. If you're missing zinc, then the nutrition piece down here, the mineral, filters up and you get a symptom. If you have a trauma in your life, let's say you had a repressed sexual molestation in your mind, in your memory, that produces an emotional stress that produces a symptom. You can have, in the neuroendocrine systems, insulin resistance that produces symptoms. And in terms of metabolism, you can have, let's just say for the sake of argument, your ketosis system is sabotaged because you've been eating Safeway muffins every morning that have trans fat in them. Well, if you treat those symptoms with drugs and suppress the symptoms, the underlying problem does not go away. So you get perpetuation of that problem and aggravation of those symptoms. And so what I'm suggesting that be done is, instead of treating these things in the middle zone here at symptom level, that we go back up into these levels and deal with the emotional therapies, psychotherapies, neuroendocrine therapies, and down here in terms of metabolism and nutrition, we focus on those. We then are able to get past the drugs, or worst case, merely reduce the level of the drug. In terms of the benefit of the system, because this is not proven by double-blind studies, this is not accepted by medical societies, it's only accepted by individual practitioners, much of this has to be done on a self-care basis, which means testing. And you can go, if money is not an object, and you can go to a medical office and hire a neuropsychologist to do an assessment. And you can pay them to do the assessment once a month. I mean, it's going to cost you a lot of money to do that. But you're going to get very, very good quality assessments if you do it that way. These people are trained, they know what they're doing, and they can repeat the same test the same way time after time after time, which gives you a longitudinal basis for knowing whether you're improving or not. But if you can't afford that, what do? Well, at-home testing, very affordable option. Computer games, like what do they cost? Not much, right? So if you get a game that has a cascade-type failure, where as the game proceeds, it gets harder and harder and harder, and when you make a mistake, it jumps up in level of hardness, you get a very nice measurement of your cognitive function. Tetris, for example. At-home testing of other kinds, suggest some things for you. The game of concentration, where you play it with a deck of cards and a stopwatch. How long does it take you to match up pairs and clear the deck from the table? That's a measurement of your short and medium-term memory. Proprioception, standard fingers to the nose test that do to see if you're drunk. Only what you can do is challenge yourself by reaching up like this and seeing how close you get, and tracking that over time tells you something about the way your brain is working. Bridge, chess, juggling, handwriting, crosswords, these are all things that have something to do with your mind. Correlations with non-cognitive tests and other interventions, well, that's looking at your medical records. Instead of just allowing your doctor to have them, get copies of all those records and look to see if you can find correlations. If you notice something in your life, put it down and keep track of when it happened and see if you can find a correlation for it. Documentation, before and after videos. If you're going to do this for your grandmother, you're going to want to know that it works, and you're going to want to be able to prove to yourself and to other people and to the insurance companies and to the public health people who may charge you with elder abuse. You're going to have to prove this, and videos are the best way to do this, because you can always cut them up and say, 1 minute of before and 1 minute of after, 1 minute of before and 1 minute of after, and it's so obvious that everybody will thank you for doing it instead of jumping up and down for you. Okay, it's now time for questions. So if you're out there in the universe and you're waving, Dan, are you tied in? Oh, okay. Yes, sir. Step up to the...
Is there a point of no return, or is it always reversible, or?
We don't know. There is obviously apoptosis that's involved in Alzheimer's disease. That's the process of cell death, programmed cell death. And if a cell is dead, you can't wake it up. And so if you have Alzheimer's disease where there's a very substantial amount of apoptosis that's taking place, where maybe somebody has had it for 2 years or 5 years, I'm more of the opinion that we're going to need stem cell technology for treating that. But right now, cell technology is blossoming at an amazing rate. And so if all you do is keep somebody around and reverse their Alzheimer's disease to where maybe they're functional and able to be competent and make decisions for themselves and wake up and dress themselves and eat and cook and do these kinds of things and pay their bills, that's probably might keep them around long enough that when cell technology matures, they'll be able to take advantage of it. But short of that, there's cells become unconscious. They don't actually die, they just stop functioning. And those cells can be reversed, and they can be reversed, and my belief is they can be reversed relatively easily. Something as simple as coconut oil can have somebody totally changing their energy level in their brain within 2 days. 2 days. I've seen that happen in 2 days. However, a reasonable expectation is that because it's cumulative, that it would take a month before you start to get to the top of the plateau, to where you're now at a point where you're having diminishing returns. And so the degree to which somebody who's had Alzheimer's disease for 1 year versus 2 years and how far you can back it up, I don't have enough experience to say that. All I can say is that I've never met, somebody who did not respond to this approach.
Could you describe subjectively some of the larger changes you've observed?
Oh, yeah. So one client in Florida is a classic example. She had she had a stroke, fell down, hit her head, had a hematoma and a surgery, and had 3 competency evaluations. Each one was worse. And the last one was maybe 3 months before I started working with her. So I got this medical record with minimal testing, did a workup, looked at these results and said, well, it's a perfect case. So she's not really responsive. She's has memory lapses where she has no idea what day it is, no idea who the president is, no idea where she's living, can't get out of bed, can't dress herself. I mean, that's how far she's gone. So did the workup. The first month she's on coconut oil and a broad spectrum multivitamin with mineral with high levels of B vitamins, roughly 10 times the RDA. Within 1 month, she's getting out of bed spontaneously, dressing herself, she's having conversations with family members. She's back. 1 month with just those things. And so the next step was to look at the medical side in terms of hormone replacement therapy or the at-home stuff with ketosis. And not only was she back, but she's back with an attitude. So, it's not just that she's able to respond, she's got, the same level of irritability and intolerance and objecting to people meddling with her life and, I'm fine, go away, this kind of thing. And so it was decided that the medical stuff would be next, and so we started her with some, her medical doctor in the area did thyroid hormone tests and found out she was low in thyroid hormone and she had a serious reverse T3 problem. Her adrenal hormones were a mess. But that her sex steroids were reasonably good. This kind of bizarreness where you'd look at it and you go, well, why would it be this way? You find this all the time. So we had put her on some pregnenolone, which is the starting point for the hormones, and her progesterone went to the top end of the normal range. Her color improved, her skin thickness improved. When people saw her, they were saying like, oh my God, what are you doing? You look great. And she's going to parties in the second month. Her cold hands and feet have normalized. All of her tingling in her feet is gone completely. Her digestion is fully normal. She's sleeping normal hours, regular hours. So that's at 2 months. And she hasn't even done ketosis yet. And then we discover she has lead poisoning. So she's on well water in a rural area. And so, there's something that I missed that the local doctor found. And so now we're dealing with that. So whether or not that's going to provide ongoing things. So it's at 3 months at this point in time. She's back in court. She had 3 more psych evaluations, one of which was she's still totally incompetent. One was that she's almost fully competent. And the third one was that there's nothing wrong with her at all. And it turns out that the one that was nothing wrong with her at all was done in the morning. She's very strong in the morning and peters out at the end of the day. The one that was in the afternoon was mixed, and the one that was supposed to be in the afternoon but got delayed 3 times and ended up being done at like 8:30 at night, that one said that she was totally incompetent. And so she goes up into court, and now she's voluntarily compromised, so she's declared to not be fully competent, but that it's up to her to decide what kinds of assistance she wants from people. So that's 3 months from being totally incapacitated to being functional again. And that's only using the tip of the iceberg, the three of the major elements that I described to you. Yes, sir.
What can you say about the coconut oil and the vitamins and the other things that you mentioned in conjunction with the thyroid that you know is damaged, hypothyroidism damaged by radiation exposure?
Yeah, when you have a thyroid issue that has been medically treated and maybe you could say overtreated, you still have to address it on the basis of its merits, its functionality. So whether or not your thyroid gland has lost its way because of just genetics or aging effects or some pesticide exposure that you have no idea, can't even remember, or whether or not it was caused by some pathology and irradiation, surgical resection of part of the thyroid gland to correct for hyperthyroidism, you still have to balance the amount of thyroid hormone to the regulatory role that it plays in your body. And that's not about the thyroid gland and about the thyroid hormone. It's about what the thyroid hormone does at the cellular level. So the analogy is it's hearing. How do you know that grandpa can hear you? If you talk in a normal voice, unless you get a response from your grandfather, you don't necessarily know that he's hearing you. And so if you scream and you get a response, and you talk normally and you don't get a response, you can assume that your grandfather is hard of hearing. And that means you need to speak louder all the time or get him a hearing aid. Well, the same thing can be true of this generalized resistance to thyroid hormone, that the tissues are not listening as well as they can, and so you want to raise the thyroid level to compensate for that deafness. Now, is there another way to do it? Maybe. But this is the standard allopathic way that's currently in use by an endocrinologist. If you go in, they'll say, okay, how do we have to raise your thyroid hormones to get the right functionality out of you? And that's how they do it. And so that's the way I'm suggesting it. There may be other ways of using small amounts to reset the thyroid gland and reset the hypothalamus, but you're not going to find many doctors who would know what you're talking about, and you'd see their eyes roll back in their head, and they'd send you off to a psychiatrist. Yes?
How do you know someone doesn't have mad cow or CBJ?
Well, I don't know that I would know, except that, as far as I know, there's no easy way to treat the Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome. And if there's some other kind of pathology, you have to identify it. So if somebody has lead poisoning, that could single-handedly be a problem for their brain. And, if you don't test it and, you just don't know. I mean, I've had 2 clients where it shocked me that they had lead poisoning. No risk factors in their life. I mean, the woman in Florida, elderly woman in Florida, she was on well water. And, you might make an assumption that well water might be contaminated. But I had one guy with brain cancer who had no risk factors in her life. I mean, he wasn't working with electronics. I mean, there's no lead paint in his house. I mean, all this kind of stuff. No sign of lead in his life at all. And yet he had high enough lead that his glucose regulation was bad. I mean, he probably contributed to his brain cancer, and he had a heart attack. But once he removed the lead poisoning, his exercise tolerance he was like mid-50s, went back to when he was 20. So he could exercise on a rebounder all day without stopping, when before that, it was 15 minutes. He'd get winded in 15 minutes just bouncing on a trampoline.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on the use of coconut oil? Like, do you cook in coconut oil? Do you consume it? How?
Most of the people I deal with just, spoon it in.
Spoon it in.
A teaspoon once a day, working up to 3 tablespoons a day, 1 tablespoon 3 times a day. But you can cook with it.
Okay.
I cook with it all the time. You can fry with it, you can bake with it. I mean, it's like a regular oil. It is a little bit inconvenient in that oils are liquid, and most people are measuring them and using them liquid, but coconut oil is more like butter. At 76 degrees, it goes through its solidification, and so most kitchens are less than 76 degrees, so you're dealing with a solid. Okay. And there's a little bit of inconvenience in terms of melting it and that kind of stuff. But if you're taking it internally, it melts in your mouth. And you can, if you're using it as a massage oil, for example, for skin quality as a facial or something, if you take some that's solid and you start rubbing on the skin, it melts and flows into the skin very nicely. Okay. And some other issue about cooking with it?
No. I mean, I just didn't know how to consume it. There's no issue with cooking.
It's a 1-to-1 substitution, a cup of coconut oil for a cup of vegetable oil or a cup of butter, it's...
I'm just surprised that coconut oil has so much beneficiary properties versus, maybe the industry that promotes, it's always about olive oil, and so
Well, olive oil has some of the benefits of coconut oil in terms of minimal rancidity.
Okay.
When you're dealing with saturated fat, it's very, very low risk for rancidity, oxidation, peroxidation. You go to 1 double bond, well, it's more susceptible, but it's not dramatic. When you go to 2 double bonds, all of a sudden it jumps way up in susceptibility, because the 2 double bonds are sitting there and there's this isolated carbon atom in between, and so this double bond activates it and that double bond activates it, so it just becomes, the target for oxygen radicals. And polyunsaturated fatty acids, that's what they're in the body for. That's what they're there for. They're an oxygen sensor. And when they get oxidized, you get conjugation and you get what are called prostaglandins, which are hormones that are in response to oxidative stress in the body. So these things are targets for oxygen, sacrificial targets that become a signal in your neuroendocrine system for organizing your defenses against free radicals. And so that's what a lot of the drugs do, the anti-inflammatory drugs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. They're interfering with that system to damp down those kinds of issues. And coconut oil is the highest MCT content of a commercial oil. So it's got that percentage of fat that burns readily. And if you're consuming olive oil, that's all long chain fat, which means that to burn fat, you have to get into ketosis, and you have to have carnitine to facilitate the transport of that long chain fat. But it works just as good if you're in ketosis. It's very easy to burn olive oil when you're in ketosis.
I've heard of some people doing oil pulling using
Say that again?
oil pulling using coconut oil. It's kind of an alternative therapy where you just kind of put coconut oil in your mouth like a teaspoon or a tablespoon, and then you keep on doing like that for about 15 minutes until it has the properties like of a water. And then, so basically it says that in doing that for 15 minutes, all the toxins and everything, and that's what you're spitting out. And I've just heard about it. I was curious to know if you...
I haven't heard about
Okay.
it, but I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody figures out that coconut oil could have a very beneficial effect on things like periodontal disease or gum recession,
Okay,
these
thank
kinds of things. Yeah.
For an intervention which sounds relatively straightforward, or some of the interventions relatively straightforward to implement, and perhaps not so subtle changes that result, why do you think that you don't have randomized trials to refer us to?
Well, one is because you have this is a very, very clinical program. It's about what's going on with a particular person, and you have to measure that and intervene at that level. And so if you were to do this on a double-blind study and have everybody does 20 things, or let's just say everybody does 10 things, then the people who have those 10 things wrong are going to benefit a lot, and the people who have other things wrong are going to benefit minimally. So it's difficult to study on that level. But I think the real answer to your question is because it's all generic. These things are, not patent drugs, and so who's going to make money off of it? So there's a huge incentive, and government money that's spent doing studies is often to facilitate the speed of getting proprietary substances through the drug approval process to the market. And so something like coconut oil, there's nobody to benefit. So this is a whole bunch of therapies can be, if you look at things that are very powerful and have been underdeveloped, that's a good example. You can say that if the things that are generic are 100 times more likely not to be developed than the things that are proprietary. But I'd love to get a study going. I've had a protocol for this for probably 2 years, waiting for funding. So it's just an issue of getting the money together. So if it really requires a philanthropic donor to make it happen. In other words, somebody has to do it just for the public benefit, because there isn't money to be made. I mean, there could be money to be made in terms of delivery of medical services. I mean, that's certainly, this could be done under a medical program in a clinic where somebody would pay $1,000 a month or something, or $5,000 a month to go to a place and have Alzheimer's cured. But the doctors wouldn't be able to compete against other doctors for providing it. So in other words, anybody with a medical shingle can set up to do this kind of thing. So it would be hard for a clinic to fund a study and then recover that money if that's what they wanted to do. Does that answer the question? Okay, thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Let's just thank Steve and
Thanks for coming. Because the life evolved with lots of free electrons. So if you go back, before oxygen was in the atmosphere, we had to reduce the atmosphere with things like methane